What happens when a 9-year-old boy walks into a courtroom armed only with truth, love, and a folder full of facts? What if that child not only speaks up, but exposes corruption, saves his grandmother, and changes the law for an entire state? This is the unbelievable true story of Diego Alvarez, the boy from a New Mexico barrio who stunned a judge, dismantled a seasoned prosecutor, and inspired a movement. You're about to witness courage beyond age, justice beyond the courtroom, and the power of a voice the world couldn't ignore. Stay to the end, because the moment you think the story can't go any further, it does. And it just might change the way you believe in justice forever. If you're ready to be moved, outraged, and inspired, hit play. This is more than a case, this is a revolution. It was supposed to be just another morning in the Santa Fe County Courthouse. Rows of tired eyes and coffee-stained folders filled the chamber. Attorneys whispered to each other. The bailiff tapped his pen, and the judge, a seasoned man named Harold Whitmore, glanced down at his notes as if reading the ending to a story he'd seen 100 times. But this day wouldn't end like any other, because a 9-year-old boy in a navy blue sweater just stood up, and everything changed. He wasn't on the witness list, he wasn't on the docket, he wasn't even tall enough for his feet to touch the floor from his chair. But there he stood, firm and unflinching. "Your Honor, may I speak?" The voice was soft, but it cut through the courtroom like a bell in a monastery. Every head turned, a few mouths dropped. The judge squinted through his bifocals. "What did you say, son?" The boy stepped forward, a thick paper folder clasped in his arms like a shield. "I'd like to speak on behalf of my grandmother. Her name is Rosa Alvarez." He paused. "She didn't do what they say she did." A silence spread across the room. You could hear the ceiling fan creak. You could hear the prosecutor's annoyed sigh. You could even hear the scratch of a pen dropping to the floor. Judge Whitmore leaned forward. He had seen a lot in his 32 years on the bench, but he had never seen this. "Son, do you even know what kind of case this is?" The boy nodded. "Yes, sir, fraud and misuse of community funds at the Santa Fe Housing Cooperative." He said it slowly, deliberately, like he had practiced it in front of a mirror. "Son, are you in school today?" "I should be, sir, but Abuela Rosa, she has a weak heart, and when her lawyer found out she couldn't pay, he quit. Yesterday." Whispers stirred like wind in tall grass. The prosecutor, a man named Calvin Briggs, leaned back in his chair and folded his arms. "This is absurd," he muttered. "Your Honor, we can't allow a minor to speak in legal defense." But Judge Whitmore wasn't looking at him. He was still staring at the boy. "You know you can't represent her, right? You're not a lawyer." "I don't want to represent her," the boy answered. "I just want to tell the truth. My name is Diego Alvarez, and I'm not here to play lawyer. I'm here because I know what happened. I was there." The judge rubbed his chin. He looked at the folder, at the boy's steady posture, at the sweat forming on the prosecutor's forehead. "All right," he said slowly. "You've got 5 minutes. As a witness." Diego nodded once. Then he placed the folder on the witness stand, opened it like it was sacred. Inside were clippings, notes, diagrams, and receipts, some hand-drawn, some printed from library computers. One page read in bold crayon, "Why Abuela didn't do it." Some jurors chuckled softly. Others leaned forward. The energy in the room had changed, because this wasn't a legal proceeding anymore. It was a story told by a child who had something to say, and the whole room, judge, jury, clerk, and counsel, was about to listen, not because they had to, but because they couldn't look away. The silence in Santa Fe had broken, and it had a name: Diego Alvarez. Diego took a breath so deep it seemed to come from a place far beyond his 9 years. He held the folder close to his chest. Then, with careful steps, he walked to the stand. The judge watched silently. So did every juror, even the court reporter. Paused her typing. "Thank you for letting me speak," Diego began. "I know this is not normal, and I'm just a kid, but I have something important to say." His voice didn't tremble. "Not yet. My grandmother, Rosa Alvarez, is the heart of our neighborhood. She's the one who shows up with arroz con pollo when someone is sick. The one who kept the lights on at the Centro Esperanza when funding dried up. He paused, looking at the prosecutor. Now they say she stole from the housing program, but I know she didn't. Because I was with her every Sunday, every single time she went through those papers. Diego reached into the folder, pulled out a drawing. It showed a kitchen, table, 2 chairs, and piles of receipts. This was our Sunday tradition. After church, we'd sit down with pan dulce and hot chocolate. She'd let me sort the receipts. Green stickers for rent payments, red for repairs, yellow for donations. He smiled, just for a second. She said, "Made the numbers feel like music." Then his voice dropped. She didn't steal that money. She was trying to fix a leaky roof. But the person who approved the payment wasn't her. Judge Whitmore leaned forward. The room grew still. When my parents died in a car crash 2 years ago, Diego continued, I stopped talking. For months, not a word. Abuela never forced. Me, she just sat with me, every night reading out loud. Sometimes books, sometimes case files, legal forms, letters, things she helped neighbors with. I started asking questions. And I realized something. When you know the rules, the world stops being scary. It starts making sense. The judge blinked slowly. The prosecutor looked away. Diego pulled out a paper. This is the withdrawal slip. September 14th, $2,700, labeled for roofing. He flipped the page. This is the photo I took with my abuela's old phone. The next day, he held it high. The roof was fine, no repairs, not even a ladder nearby. Gasps swept across the room. And here, he turned another page, is the budget note. It says authorized by RA, but that's not how my abuela signs. I checked every note she's ever written me. She loops her A like a swirl. This one is printed, hard, sharp, not her. The judge raised an eyebrow. You're telling us you compared signatures? Diego nodded. I asked the librarian. She showed me a book about handwriting analysis. I read it twice. He straightened his back. I may not be a lawyer, but I know when something doesn't feel right. And what they're saying about abuela, it's not just wrong, it's lazy. The courtroom murmured again. The prosecutor stood to object. This child, this entire performance is irrelevant and inappropriate, but Judge Whitmore held up a hand. Sit down, Mr. Briggs. He turned back to Diego. You said she has heart trouble? Yes. Sir, she had an episode just last month. The doctors said any more stress could be dangerous. That's why I'm here. I can't let her go through this alone. Diego took a final paper from his folder. It was a letter, written in neat Spanish. He unfolded it slowly. This is what she wrote. To the community board 3 weeks ago, warning them about a missing invoice. No one responded. He handed it to the judge. She was trying to stop the fraud, not commit it. His voice cracked. For the first time, the courtroom sat still, all eyes on the little boy who had become the most important voice in the room, a voice not trained in law, but forged in grief, fueled by love and grounded in truth, a child's voice for justice, and it was only just beginning. It didn't start with the law. It started with churros fresh from the oil, sprinkled with cinnamon and sugar, served on a chipped plate next to a steaming mug of champorado. Sunday afternoons were sacred in the Alvarez home, not because of religion, but because of ritual. After church and lunch, the house would go quiet. Rosa would bring out her receipts, envelopes full of notes, papers marked with colored tabs, and Diego, barely tall enough to reach the table, would climb onto the same wooden chair every time. Are we balancing the books today, abuela? He'd ask. Sí, mi amor. Time to see if the world makes sense. That was her favorite phrase. Every expense, she'd explain, tells a story. Who needed help, why it mattered, where the money went, and if it came back. They didn't use spreadsheets. They used colored stickers. Blue for rent paid by struggling families. Red for repairs to leaky pipes or broken heaters. Yellow for donated goods, blankets, books, baby clothes, and purple. Purple was for things she questioned. Expenses that didn't add up, numbers that whispered secrets. Rosa would lay out the receipts like puzzle pieces, and Diego, with small hands and wide eyes, learned how to fit them together. Look for what's missing, she'd say. Numbers lie less than people. He didn't know it at the time, but she was teaching him to read the world, not just the receipts, but the gaps, the silences, the spaces between what was said and what was hidden. Sometimes Rosa would sigh, and he'd look up. Too much? He'd ask, No, mijo, just you too heavy. She carried the weight of the community, not just the paperwork, but the fears, the hopes, the dreams of people who had no one else to help them. And Diego watched, listened, absorbed it all like sunlight. One Sunday, after organizing stacks of invoices, he asked a question that would change everything. Abuela, who checks if someone steals from the program? Rosa paused, put down her pen. The board, the city, sometimes no one, until it's too late. That stayed with him, the idea that wrong things could happen and no one would know, or worse, no one would care. So he started paying closer attention, noticing when numbers didn't match, when totals felt strange, when new signatures didn't look quite like hers. And Rosa noticed too. She saw the same doubts, the same gaps, but she had hope that doing the right thing would be enough, that someone would listen if she raised the alarm. So she filed reports, sent emails, left voicemails that no one returned, but Diego didn't forget. He made a copy of everything she filed. He asked the librarian how to look up old council meetings. He read housing policy guides next to kids' mystery books. When Rosa fell ill, he told her stories at night. Not fairy tales, but, Axe evidence, abuela, he'd whisper. We'll show them. We'll prove it. He didn't plan to end up in court, but when her lawyer quit and panic filled their small home, he knew. This was the moment she had raised him for. Not to be loud, not to fight, but to speak when no one else would. With truth and love and the kind of clarity only a child can carry. That's how Sunday lessons at the kitchen table became something more. Not just a tradition, but a foundation. Not just a memory, but a movement. And Diego? He wasn't just telling the court what he'd learned. He was living it one sticker at a time. Diego stood at the witness stand. No robe, no law degree. Just a small boy with a folder, conviction, and a fire behind his eyes that couldn't be taught. The judge had given him 5 minutes, but 5 minutes would feel like a master class. He took a breath, opened the folder, and began. Let me start with September 14th, he said. $2,700 was withdrawn from the Santa Fe housing account for roof repairs. He held up a photo. Here's the roof the very next morning. No work, no workers, no damage. The jury leaned in. Here's the invoice, Diego continued. And here's a printout from the city building permits office. No permit was filed, which is required before any roof work begins. He turned to the prosecutor. Did your office verify this, sir? Mr. Briggs straightened in his chair, cleared his throat. That's the building department's responsibility. Not mine, Diego nodded calmly. I understand, but this is a criminal trial and your office filed the charges. Shouldn't someone have checked before accusing my abuela of stealing? A quiet stir rippled through the courtroom. Diego wasn't being dramatic. He was being deliberate, measured, and precise. Next, he said, flipping to another tab. September 21st. Father $600 for new security cameras at the community center. He held up another photo. This was taken 2 days after the payment. These are the same cameras from last year. I checked the model numbers. He paused. Let it sit. Mr. Briggs, did you inspect the security footage? Or the equipment? Briggs didn't answer. The silence was louder than words. Diego turned to the judge. I have more. But first, something important. He reached for a small folder within the folder, held up 2 sheets. Signatures. One is my abuela's. The other is on the documents submitted for the payments. He held them up, side by side. Look closely. The R loops differently. Her real signature has a soft curl. The other is stiff, sharp, mechanical. Forgery, someone whispered. I don't know, Diego said. I'm not a forensic expert, but I compared it to birthday cards, grocery lists, and city documents she's signed. And they all look like this one. He tapped the original. Not that one. Briggs finally stood. Your Honor, we can't seriously consider the handwriting analysis of a child. Diego turned, calmly, respectfully. I agree, sir. So, do you have a professional analysis that proves it is hers? The courtroom was still. Even the judge sat straighter. Do you? Diego asked again. No, Briggs muttered. Diego looked back to the jury. You don't have to believe me, but someone should have asked that question before putting an old woman on trial. He opened one last pocket. This is a statement from Ms. Velez, the night custodian. She saw a man leaving the office on September 14th with a folder just like this. She didn't recognize him, but she said he wasn't from the neighborhood. She reported it to the city hotline, but no one followed up. Diego looked down, then back up, his voice softer now. My abuela taught me the law is like a puzzle. You have to fit the pieces, but if you force them in the wrong place, it looks finished, but it's not true. He closed the folder, stepped down, left a silence in the room so thick it made even the bailiff forget to breathe. No shouting, no theatrics, just a 9-year-old boy laying down facts like a seasoned litigator. The court had expected a performance, but they got a prosecution of the prosecution, and Diego? He wasn't done yet. The judge had just asked if anyone else had questions, and that's when Diego spoke again, his voice calm, unshaken. But this time with something new in his hand, a white envelope, sealed, labeled in neat handwriting, only open if truth fails. Your Honor, he said, holding it up. I was hoping I wouldn't have to show this, but I believe the time has come. The judge leaned forward. The courtroom fell into complete stillness. Diego opened the envelope carefully, pulled out a small audio player, plugged in a speaker, and pressed play, static. Then a voice, clear, confident, familiar. We don't have time to wait for full reports, just push it through. She's an old woman running a program no one watches. Another voice responded. But sir, we have no hard evidence yet. No one's checked those invoices, or even interviewed her. Then the first voice again, colder now, more impatient. We don't need to. My numbers have to stay clean before the campaign. The room erupted in gasps. All eyes turned to the prosecutor, Mr. Calvin Briggs. His face had gone pale. He stood trembling. That recording is inadmissible. It's a violation of privacy. But Diego was ready. It was recorded legally, he replied. Your Honor, this was captured on a public line from the city's Community Affairs Office. All lines have a disclosure warning that calls may be recorded. Judge Whitmore looked stunned. He gestured for silence. Mr. Briggs, he said. Is that your voice? Briggs didn't answer. Didn't need to. Everyone knew. Diego continued. 3 days after my abuela was accused, Mr. Briggs received a deposit. He held up a bank statement. $1,200 from a company called Loma Vista Consulting. He flipped the page. Here's a city contract showing that Loma Vista was awarded a last-minute bid for a housing audit, signed off by Mr. Briggs. Murmurs swirled again. Would anyone like to see the list of shareholders? Diego asked. He held up another page, because one of them is Mr. Briggs's cousin. The prosecutor's hands began to shake. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Diego stepped closer, not to intimidate, but to clarify. My abuela didn't steal anything. She tried to report it. She was silenced. But we recorded everything, because she told me. He turned to the jury. Truth doesn't need a costume, it just needs a witness. A few jurors nodded, some wiped their eyes. The judge looked down at his desk, then up at the boy, and for a moment the courtroom felt like it had shifted, not just the air, but the balance of power. A child had exposed corruption, with nothing but a folder, a voice recorder, and relentless love for his grandmother. Mr. Briggs, the judge finally said, I suggest you sit down and remain silent until further notice. Briggs collapsed into his chair, defeated, disgraced. Diego turned back to the crowd. Abuela told me, he said gently, that justice isn't about punishing people. It's about stopping the hurt before it spreads. He paused. I hope. We just did that today, and no one, not even the judge, could say otherwise. 6 weeks after the trial, Diego returned to the Santa Fe courthouse. But this time, he wasn't holding a folder. He was holding a pen, a silver pen engraved with his name. The governor had handed it to him, and now, in front of cameras and counsel, members, Diego watched as a bill was signed into law. They called it the Diego Act. It required prosecutors to provide clear physical evidence of a defendant's presence during financial crimes. No more assumptions, no more shortcuts, no more silence. The high courtroom had taught him truth could shake walls. But this law, it proved truth could also build them stronger. Diego didn't smile much during the ceremony. He just looked around, saw faces from his neighborhood, saw kids from his school, even the janitor from Centro Esperanza, wiping away tears. They were all there because it wasn't just a law. It was a line drawn in history, a line that said, justice belongs to everyone, even a 9-year-old, especially a 9-year-old. Later that month, Diego was invited to speak at the University of New Mexico's School of Law. The dean introduced him as the youngest legal mind to ever set foot on this stage. Diego stepped up to the podium, looked out at a sea of future lawyers, and said simply, I'm not here because I want to be famous. I'm here because my abuela believed in helping people, and because nobody listened to her, until I made them. The crowd rose to their feet, even the professors. Later, a young girl walked up to Diego. She was 8. Her backpack was bigger than she was. She said, I want to do what you did. Diego smiled. You will. Just keep your eyes open and your heart brave. Meanwhile, across the state, classrooms began including Diego's story in civics lessons. Teachers used it to explain ethics, evidence, and courage. A nonprofit offered him a scholarship for every year until college. And Abuela Rosa? She began visiting community centers again, not to manage them, but to teach other grandparents how to spot fraud, how to speak up, how to believe that they matter. The mayor gave her a medal. She tucked it away in a drawer. Diego's the medal, she said. He's everything I ever hoped this world would give back, and Mr. Briggs. He was being investigated by the state attorney general, removed from office, stripped of his license. His fall was steep but fair, because in a courtroom once ruled by indifference, a boy had rewritten the rules, not with vengeance, but with vision, not with fury, but with focus. That's what the Diego Act stood for. That's what every child in New Mexico learned that year. Not all heroes wear badges. Sometimes they wear sneakers and carry truth in a paper folder. Months passed, but Diego's name didn't fade. In fact, it grew, not just in New Mexico, but across the country. People started calling him the Barrio Barrister. His story made national news, documentaries, podcasts, school curriculums from New York to California picked up the case, but Diego never let it change him. He still walked to school with a backpack 2 sizes too big, still helped Abuela Rosa in her garden, still got grounded for forgetting to take out the trash. Because fame had found, but humility had raised him. One afternoon, a letter arrived from the U.S. Supreme Court, an invitation to visit. Not as a tourist, but as a guest of honor. Chief Justice herself had read about the Diego Act. She called it a model of how youth engagement can challenge injustice. Diego wore a suit that day, his first too big in the shoulders, too long in the sleeves, but he wore it with pride. They walked him through the halls of legal giants, and in one quiet room, he stood before a case display. It was empty. Just a plaque, reserved for the future. He stared for a long time, then whispered to his grandmother, maybe one day. Rosa squeezed his hand. No doubt, mijo. No doubt. Back in Santa Fe, the city renamed the block in front of Centro Esperanza. Now it read, Calle de Diego Alvarez. Murals soon followed, Diego with his folder, Rosa with her hand on his shoulder, below it in both Spanish and English, Truth has no age. Diego's impact wasn't measured in fame. It was measured in spark, the kind that lights others. A group of teens started a youth watchdog group called Folder Force. They trained in local government procedures, filed public records requests, showed up at council meetings, asked real questions. Rosa laughed the first time she saw their logo. It was a cartoon folder with sunglasses. "Diego," she said, "look what you started." But Diego just nodded. "Good. Let them keep going. Let them keep asking, because justice doesn't retire. Justice learns, and it teaches." At his 10th birthday party, he didn't ask for gifts. He asked for books, legal books, for the community library. One donor brought 50. Another brought a plaque. It read, "For Diego Alvarez, who showed us that courage doesn't come with age. It comes with love." And when Diego saw it, he didn't cry. He didn't pose for pictures. He just turned to Rosa and said, "We did it, abuela." She smiled. "You did it, Diego. And the world is better for it." The boy who once stood alone in a courtroom now stood as a symbol of what happens when one voice speaks and 1,000 others echo, not because they were told to, but because they were finally brave enough to believe they could. What started as one child standing for his abuela became a tidal wave of change. Diego Alvarez didn't just rewrite one courtroom story. He rewrote the way we think about who belongs in the fight for justice. His courage reminded us that power isn't in position, it's in purpose. That truth doesn't need permission. It only needs someone brave enough to speak it. And sometimes that someone is just 9 years old. If Diego's story touched you, share it, because the world needs fewer headlines about failure and more spotlights on everyday heroes like Diego. Tell someone that truth has no age, that justice has no color, and that love, real, selfless, unstoppable love, can still win. And if this story moved you even a little, don't scroll past. Let it sit with you, then pass it on, because maybe the next Diego is already watching, and all they need is to know that their voice matters, just like his did.